Welcome back to Hot Air with me, Josh. I think we're on terms where I don't have to say Joshua Robert anymore. That feels a little bit too highbrow. So I think I'm just going to say Josh because, that's my name. But I'm very excited for today's episode because we've got a triple feature packed with stories that matter. From government erasure of the LGBTQ plus people to the battle over Jeffrey Epstein's files. Yes, I am going to go there. And finally, one brave FBI agent standing up for his right to proudly display a pride flag. It's a lot, and it's all connected by one theme: truth, justice, and visibility. I suppose that's three themes. And I've got some really exciting news. Guys, listen, I got a new mic stand. Which means I'm no longer, if you're on YouTube, I can wave my arms around. I can be animated like I always am in real life. And I'm not even going to hit anything. I know to you this might seem like a stupid thing to say, but it's a literal game changer. I feel like I have so much space. I have a lot of space for activities. It just feels great to not be so confined by that old janky microphone. So I'm ready to get into it and let my arms fly free. But before we dive in, I just want to remind you to follow me on social media for updates, behind the scenes content, hot takes on current stories. I've got some fun content planned and scheduled. And if you haven't yet, you can check out my merch. It's a fun way to support the show and rock some bold designs. And finally, if you got a story that you want to share or a topic you think that we should cover, head on over to my website and submit it there. My website is hotairwithjoshuarobert.com. I love hearing from listeners. I love the ideas that often take shape and become these episodes. And I didn't tell you my social media handle @_hotairpod on Instagram and TikTok. So buckle it up, baby, because this one's going to be a little bit intense, very eye-opening, and absolutely worth your time, because isn't every episode of Hot Air worth your motherfucking time? I would say so. So let's hit it. Now, before we get into the three updates that I said we were going to, we're actually going to do a quick and important update because something big just happened in Texas, literally, I think today, and it's going to shape the political map heading forward into 2026. And yes, when I say that this is big, I mean the kind of big that has Republicans scrambling yet again. Democrats are cheering cautiously, and legal scholars are reaching for the popcorn. I did an episode about this, about the gerrymandering and redistricting the map in Texas, but we have a little update because for the first time in a long time, a Trump-appointed federal judge has ruled that Texas cannot use its newly drawn congressional map in the 2026 elections. And let's dig into what happened, why it matters, and what comes next. Because this story isn't just about lines on a map. As you know, if you've been paying attention, it's about voting power, racial representation, which I argue is the most important part of this, and whether the Voting Rights Act still has any muscle left in it. So very, very quick recap. Skip 30 seconds ahead if you don't want the recap. But Texas, which grows more and more diverse every single year, every day, has gained 2 new congressional seats after the 2020 census. Population growth came overwhelmingly from communities of color, primarily Latino, Black, and Asian populations. But when the Republican-controlled legislature sat down to draw the new maps, something, I guess, interesting happened. Instead of creating new districts that reflected the actual demographic growth, Texas lawmakers created maps that protected existing Republican seats and strategically diluted the voting power of minority communities. In some cases, they cracked diverse urban areas into multiple districts dominated by white rural votes. In others, they packed minority voters into just a few districts, minimizing their influence. Basically, the same story we've seen before in Texas, North Carolina, Alabama. Pick a state, honestly, but it's a little bit more blatant. Civil rights groups sued, arguing that the new maps violated Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which prohibits racial discrimination in redistricting. which of course it's violating Section 2. It's like very in your face. And here's where things continue to get even more interesting because for years, federal courts have become more hesitant to step in on gerrymandering cases. Between Supreme Court rulings that limit federal oversight and a general trend of deferring to state legislatures, the legal landscape has been, let's say, not great for voting rights. Which is why this next part is making headlines. Judge David Counts, appointed by Donald Trump, sided with the plaintiffs. Wild, right? You fucking heard that right. Sided with the plaintiffs. Probably your side and my side if you're listening. In his ruling, Judge Counts said Texas's new map, I quote, appears to have been drawn with a disregard for the state's minority population, and that there was substantial evidence that the map, again, I quote, diminishes the ability of minority voters to elect their candidate of choice, end quote. He concluded that Texas cannot use this map in the 2026 elections and must redraw it to comply with the Voting Rights Act. This is huge for several reasons. And you know, when I get full body chills, it means I give a flying fuck, I care, and that it's something that's really important because I did not expect to see this on my Instagram feed today. First, courts have been skeptical about race-based gerrymandering claims, especially when states argue that redistricting decisions are based on political considerations, not racial ones. Of course, they're not going to outright say it has to do with race. It's the classic, we didn't gerrymander because they're Latino, we gerrymandered because they're Democrats. Still racial. It's that typical defense. And for years, that argument has worked pretty well for Republican-controlled states. Second, the fact that a Trump-appointed judge issued this ruling adds a lot of weight and political tension, obviously. It's much harder for conservatives to dismiss this as a liberal activist judge moment, and it signals that even within conservative judicial circles, there's a growing discomfort with just how brazen some of these maps have become. And third, the timing matters, because while the ruling doesn't affect 2024, obviously, because that was last year, it does affect the next major redistricting cycle for 2026. And as Texas continues to grow and shift demographically, even small changes to the map could tilt key districts. But before we celebrate, before I get way too excited and have too many full body chills, before we celebrate justice, let's pump the brakes because, of course, Texas is appealing. We knew that was going to happen. They've already signaled this ruling will head to the Fifth Circuit, one of the most conservative appeals courts in the country. And from there, it could end up at the Supreme Court, where the Voting Rights Act has taken more hits than a punching bag at a CrossFit class. So what does this mean, you might ask? Well, good thing I'm here to tell you. It means the ruling could stand, or it could get overturned. 50-50, it could go either way. It's far too early, of course, to predict, but it does mean Texas has to start planning for the possibility that its maps may need to be redrawn. And that alone is noteworthy because forced redistricting rarely helps the party currently holding power, aka the Republicans. If they got to stick to their old map, it's probably not going to go well for them. It also means voting rights advocates have a fresh opening. Not only does this ruling reaffirm that Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act still exists, even if weakened, but it signals that courts may still be willing to intervene when lawmakers get reckless. And here's the bigger picture that I want you, my friends, to take away. This isn't just about one state. Texas's ruling comes on the heels of decisions in Alabama and Louisiana where courts, again, sometimes conservative judges, told legislatures they could not dilute Black voting power. We may be seeing a small, fragile, early pattern, which is judges growing uncomfortable with maps that twist minority representation beyond recognition. And we're not out of the woods. The Voting Rights Act is still under threat. But cases like this remind us that it's not all lost. We're not completely in shit here. There are still legal tools available. There are still judges that are willing to apply them, and there are still moments where the system pushes back against anti-democratic maneuvering. So here's where we land today. Texas cannot use that new gerrymandering map for 2026. The state is appealing, the courts will be watching, and the rest of us will be watching too. And next up, we're going to look at the ways that the Trump administration approached the LGBTQ plus community, specifically gay and lesbian people. I've done plenty of episodes about how they have rolled back trans rights, but there were a few things that I saw recently, a few articles that were important to point out specific to gay and lesbian peeps. And we're going to talk about how some of these policies and decisions were not just neutral, they're actively erasing our existence in very critical spaces. And this is not a story of hypothetical concern. This is about real consequences that have affected real people, from the way our identities are treated in official government reports to the policies that impact our healthcare, our workplaces, our families, and our very sense of security in this country. These are real things that are happening right now and have happened since the Trump administration came into office. I'm not making this up. I'm not pulling it out of my ass. These are facts. So I want to start by talking about the human rights reports. For decades, the U.S. Department of State has published an annual report on human rights conditions around the world. These reports are meant to document abuses and provide a basis for U.S. foreign policy, and historically, they've included information about LGBTQ plus populations. Recognizing that persecution based on sexual orientation and gender identity is a human rights concern. And I think you know where I'm going with this. Under the Trump administration, this changed. In 2017, Human Rights Report mentions of LGBTQ plus people were noticeably absent in multiple sections, where previous reports had discussed discrimination, violence, and state-sanctioned persecution against LGBTQ plus individuals. These issues were either omitted entirely or downplayed. This wasn't just a small oversight. Omitting LGBTQ plus people from discussions of human rights sends a signal, both internationally and domestically. The signal is that our rights are somehow less important, that our struggles are less urgent, and that our existence doesn't merit acknowledgement from the highest levels of government. And it did not stop there. Domestically, the administration implemented policies that actively rolled back protections for LGBTQ plus people. One of the most glaring examples is the attempt to redefine gender for the purposes of federal civil rights protections. In 2020, the Department of Health and Human Services proposed a rule that would have limited the definition of sex in federal civil rights law to biological sex as determined at birth. This was aimed squarely at erasing the recognition of transgender people in healthcare and anti-discrimination protections. But the ripple effect of such policies also impacts lesbians and gay men. When gender identity is stripped from legal protections, it erodes the broader understanding of how discrimination works. Policies like this normalize the idea that LGBTQ plus people's rights are negotiable, conditional, and subject to political whims. Another example is the Department of Justice under Trump. The DOJ stopped defending Title VII protections for LGBTQ plus employees in court, essentially arguing that federal employment law did not protect people from discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity. This move was devastating because it sent a message that LGBTQ plus Americans didn't have the same basic workplace protections that other Americans take for granted. Imagine showing up to work every day knowing that if you were fired simply for being gay or lesbian, the federal government would not step in to defend you. That's real fear, and it's the kind of fear that can't be erased just by saying, oh, we didn't mean to hurt anyone. And I have thought about this a lot because I do at times feel that I face a bit of discrimination at one of my workplaces. It's not outright, it's not right in your face. There are a lot of Republicans where I work that proudly fly Trump flags, even to this day. How anyone can still support them, I don't know, but they do. And there are times that I feel uncomfortable and that I feel like I am not getting the same treatment as my straight male coworkers are. But it doesn't fucking matter because they can fire me at any time should they decide Josh is too flaming for this location. He's outie. Like I would just have to suck it up and deal with it. Like there's nothing I could do, which is some bullshit. Now moving on from my rant, let's talk about healthcare. It's another area where policy choices under this administration had serious consequences. The Trump administration rolled back parts of the Affordable Care Act that protected LGBTQ plus individuals from discrimination in healthcare settings. Hospitals and clinics were allowed to deny care or refuse treatment to LGBTQ plus patients based on religious or moral objections. But don't doctors take a fucking oath where they gotta save your ass should they need to, regardless of who you are? The consequences of this policy are immediate and tangible. People avoided care that they needed, or worse, were denied life-saving treatment simply because of who they are. And education also was not immune. Guidance protecting LGBTQ plus students from discrimination under Title IX was rescinded, leaving queer students vulnerable to harassment, bullying, and unsafe school environments. And while these actions were framed under the language of protecting religious freedom or clarifying the law, the effect was very clear. LGBTQ plus students, families, and communities were made less safe. Religion is always the excuse here. Now, it's important to recognize the broader cultural impact. It's not just these small scenarios. The erasure in government reports, the rollbacks in protections, the legal arguments against LGBTQ plus rights, it all works together. Policy isn't just about rules on paper. Policy is going to shape perception. When the federal government, the fucking federal government, stops naming LGBTQ plus people as a group worthy of protection or acknowledgement, it contributes to a societal climate where discrimination feels permissible. It feels okay. It feels like you can go ahead and do it. It tells people that it's okay to ignore us, to exclude us, to treat us as less than. And that's not theoretical. It's the lived reality for countless LGBTQ plus Americans. It's like we are back in high school and the Trump administration is just a straight up fucking bully. There were, of course, court cases and legal battles where these policies were challenged. Advocates and activists pushed back at every turn, rightfully so, and in many cases, protections were restored by courts or under subsequent administrations. But the fact that these battles were necessary at all demonstrates how high the stakes were and are. The Trump administration's approach wasn't just about policy. It was about messaging, right to his base. It was about redefining whose rights mattered and whose did not. And this is why it's crucial that we document these moments. We cannot let erasure become normal. We cannot allow a federal report or a Department of Justice memo to determine whether or not our lives and experiences are acknowledged. LGBTQ plus people, gay, lesbian, bisexual, trans, queer, all the fucking things exist in every corner of society. I've said it many times. We're people, and people have always existed. Well, except for when people didn't exist, but you know what I mean. What I'm trying to say is that we deserve visibility, protection, and just basic respect. And it's the job of the government to ensure that, not undermine it. Let me remind them, you work for us. You fucking work for me, bitch. So get your shit together. I can't wait till I actually have someone that works for me so I can be like, you work for me, bitch. And you have no rights, so I can do whatever I want. Okay, no, I would never do that. Once this podcast has a whole ass network, I'm going to be the best company runner. I don't even like calling myself a boss. When I've been in boss positions, I'm like, no, I'm just trying to run shit here. I don't like being called boss, although I'm pretty bossy. Now, let's bring it back to what actually matters. So the effects of these policies are generational. When young LGBTQ plus people see their government failing to recognize them, when they see laws that explicitly or implicitly signal that their identities are problematic or controversial, it's going to shape how they see themselves and their potential in the world. I can't imagine what it feels like right now to be wondering if you should come out of the closet if you're like 15 years old and there's just so much hate. It's going to influence whether they feel safe at school, whether they pursue certain careers, whether they feel that love, family, and community are even attainable to them. I cannot imagine that it feels very good. And let's be very clear, this isn't partisan fear-mongering. These are documented facts. There's a long record of policy decisions, public statements, and official reports that demonstrate a clear pattern of deprioritizing and even attacking LGBTQ plus rights under the Trump administration. Understanding this helps us fight for change today, because if we forget, or if these actions are swept under the rug and not talked about, they become easier to repeat. The fact that I had to go down a rabbit hole to even find this information tells you almost everything you need to know. So, as we reflect on this section of our episode today, I want to emphasize something. LGBTQ plus Americans have always resisted erasure. We have always fought for recognition and dignity and protection, even when the odds were completely stacked against us. And we, of course, will continue to do so. And policies may change, administrations will come and go, but the fight for visibility and equality has been going on a long time, is ongoing, and will continue. And it's up to all of us to make sure that erasure is never accepted as normal. And think about the power of naming here, naming the people affected, naming the policies, naming the erasure, name the people that are doing harm against us. When we name it and we confront it, we can change it. And that is the essence of activism, advocacy, and ultimately hope. Point it out, draw attention to it, tell people who are not aware, and call a bitch out. And now the moment you've all been waiting for. I mean, maybe. We're going to talk about something now that has haunted headlines for years. A story full of intrigue, politics, and very powerful people that are trying to control what the public gets to see. We're talking about the Epstein files, the headline on every news network lately, the secret government documents related to Jeffrey Epstein's crimes, the alleged enablers, and the systemic failures that allowed him to operate for so long. And we're going to break down where these files stand today. I want to talk about current stuff because we know all about the past. We'll talk about the legal hurdles surrounding their release and some surprising political maneuvers that have made this story even more complicated. And that's really what I want to talk about today. There's been some very interesting shifts, shall we say, that make this a little bit more complicated than you might realize. So let's start with the basics, okay? For years, the Epstein files have been locked up under federal oversight, partially because of privacy concerns and partially because of ongoing investigations. These files include evidence, testimonies, grand jury documents, and a host of other sensitive materials that could implicate high-profile figures in ways that would be explosive for the public record. Naturally, there's been enormous pressure to make them public, both from the survivors seeking justice and from Congress members pushing for transparency, and that has shifted a lot this week. People have all of a sudden changed their minds, but here's where it gets legally interesting. There is a law that governs the release of these kind of documents. Even if Congress passes a bill demanding the files to be made public, if the Department of Justice has an ongoing investigation connected to the material, the law prohibits release. And this is not a loophole, it's a safeguard. The idea is simple. You can't release evidence if it could interfere with a criminal investigation or compromise due process, something that I think all of us can agree upon. So even if the Senate votes overwhelmingly to release the files, the DOJ can and is legally obligated to say, not yet, investigation ongoing. And to be clear, what I mean by we all agree with this, files should not be released if there is an ongoing investigation, because then a lot of things can't be used in court. Rumors will run rampant. It clearly interferes with the investigation. I'm talking broad here, like just like basic law. That makes sense. But in this situation, that law, in my opinion, is being used to keep things under wraps. And that little law is kind of exactly what has put the Epstein files in this tense limbo. Politicians, advocacy groups, and survivors are all calling for transparency, claiming that the public deserves to see what the federal government knew and when. But the DOJ has consistently maintained that releasing the files could jeopardize active inquiries. That's the friction at the heart of the story. Law versus politics, public demand versus investigative necessity. And also, they're calling it a hoax and saying Democrats made it up. They're just doing anything to twist this, right? Then we get to the Trump twist. Earlier this year, Trump publicly called for the Epstein files to be released, framing it as a matter of transparency. He even suggested that making them public would be a significant step in holding powerful people accountable. And at first glance, it seems like a straightforward promise to give the public what it wants. But again, here's the twist. Trump also reportedly directed former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi, who's now head of the FBI, right? FBI? DOJ. No, DOJ. She is the head of the DOJ, to open her own investigation into Epstein's activities and connections with Democrats. Sorry, I think I said at the beginning of the year. I meant at the beginning of this week, not this year. This week, because Trump was like, no, we're not going to release those documents. Again, it's a Democratic hoax. There's nothing in there. Even though while he was running for president again, this was something he was running on, that he was going to release the Epstein files. And even one of the survivors that was abused by Epstein voted for Donald Trump, thinking he was going to release these files. So originally, when he was running, he was for the files being released. And then perhaps he saw that his name was in there over 2,000 times and then decided, maybe I shouldn't release these files. Then all of a sudden, earlier this week, he's flipped the script and said, release it, whatever. But apparently he can just release it himself as the president. So why hasn't he? That's the real question. And just to make sense of this, bringing it right back around, he said release the files, but at the same time, he's telling Pam Bondi, director of the DOJ, to investigate these claims. So if there's an ongoing investigation, he can't release the files. Which, let's see if I can make this a little bit cleaner. Although this is where it gets legally messy, but this will probably make more sense. When a new investigation is launched, it can extend the period during which documents can be released. That means, in practical terms, Trump's sudden call for release may have unintentionally or intentionally delayed the release of the very files he apparently wanted to make public. By initiating another investigation, the DOJ has a lawful reason to keep everything under wraps, citing ongoing inquiry protections. Which is exactly what I said, I just had written it much nicer. So what does this mean for the release of the files? Will they ever see the light of day? And the short answer is that it's very complicated. There is no answer, really. On one hand, political pressure is mounting. As we know, senators, members of Congress, and activists are publicly urging the administration to release the files. They argue that the public's right to know outweighs bureaucratic delays, especially given the gravity of Epstein's crimes and the high-profile individuals that are implicated. On the other hand, federal law is clear. If there is an active investigation, whether by DOJ, the FBI, or an independent state investigation, the files cannot be released without violating statutory protections. I should go to law school. Okay, and this all is not theoretical. The law explicitly allows for suppression of documents in ongoing investigations, and courts have upheld this standard repeatedly. It's designed to prevent interference with criminal proceedings, protect witnesses, and ensure that evidence is not tampered with or misrepresented. Things that, again, like I said before, I think we can all get on board with, but in this circumstance, it's being used for the wrong things. From a legal standpoint, it's pretty much airtight, which means that even if political pressure continues to build and the Senate agrees to release these files, the DOJ can and likely will keep them sealed if there's an ongoing investigation. But let's not ignore the political theater here, because this is what I really want to talk about. Trump's sudden reversal from pushing for transparency to initiating an investigation raises concerns. Was it a genuine attempt to ensure justice? Probably not. Or is it strategic to maintain control over what information is released? And either way, the effect is the same. The The timeline for public access to the files has become uncertain. And it may be years before we see them in full, if ever. All of the documents that have come out have been released and or leaked by the Epstein estate, not by government. There's also a human element, of course, that often gets lost in discussions like this. Survivors and advocates are frustrated, and understandably so. More than frustrated, they're fucking pissed. For them, every day that the files remain secret is another day that they feel silenced and ignored. The files are not just pieces of paper. They're a record of crimes, abuses, and systemic failures. The release could validate years of advocacy, give survivors a sense of justice, and hold the powerful accountable. But that same need for accountability is not caught in a legal tug of war that isn't easily resolved. And the only person really who has been held accountable is Ghislaine Maxwell, a woman. For all of these men's crimes, I'm glad she should be in a much worse prison than she is because she is a convicted sex offender. But Jeffrey Epstein is dead. And no one else, maybe with the exception of Prince Andrew, he's never been imprisoned. He's settled out of court with one of the survivors and now had his title stripped from him, but he's still living in a fucking castle. So I take back what I said. There's been no justice for him either. The only person who has paid for these crimes is a woman who is sitting in a cushy prison. So these survivors feel that there has been no justice. And here is another layer: media coverage and public perception. Because the files are tied up in legal and political maneuvering, the story often becomes about who's winning politically rather than what the files actually contain. Speculation fills the gap that is left by secrecy, and the truth, which is the evidence, the testimonies, the documents themselves, remain inaccessible. That's a problem because transparency isn't just about satisfying curiosity. It's about trust in institutions, accountability for wrongdoing, and ensuring that powerful people cannot operate above the law. So where does this leave us? The Trump administration's approach, combined with federal legal protections, has created a perfect storm of delay, or potential delay. We don't actually know what's going to happen, but potential delay. The files may pass the Senate to be released, but as long as the DOJ maintains that there's an open investigation, the law is on their side. But I really don't think that people are going to go for that. People are going to flip the fuck out if that's the case. Trump's public calls for transparency, paired with his directive to initiate a new investigation, have further complicated the path to public access. And so the public is left waiting, left watching, and wondering when, or even if, justice and full transparency will finally prevail. What's very clear, though, is that this story isn't over. I don't know if it ever will be. The Epstein files are still legally restricted, politically charged, and of enormous public interest. Every statement, every investigation, every court filing adds a whole nother layer to the tension that is surrounding these files. And as long as the files remain sealed, there's going to be questions. There's going to be speculation and frustration because the American public, rightly, wants to know what really happened, who was involved, and why justice, which hasn't happened, took so long or is going to take so long. And I, frankly, could give two flying fucks if every Democrat was in these files and was proved to be a sex offender. If every Republican was proved to be a sex offender. I don't want that for these people, but if they are on there and they have committed these crimes, they should be imprisoned. I have a very harsh stance on things like this. I frankly think that you should just be taken out if you have committed a crime against somebody underage. I just think to hell with you, get rid of them. Either put them all on an island and we'll never see them again and they can fend for themselves, or I don't know, throw them in a volcano. Like I can't, there's no part of me that thinks they deserve any grace. So if Bill Clinton, if Joe Biden, if Obama, if whomever was on there, I would want to know. And you would think that if Trump is saying that it's all Democrats on there, why wouldn't he release the files if it was? Why wouldn't he just be like, here you go. I was right. I'm not in here. And the Democrats are. Like, come the fuck on. We're not that stupid. America's pretty dumb, but we're not that dumb. And I could continue with the Epstein stuff forever, but I won't. That was a bit of a departure, but it's an important story, right? We should advocate for these women so that they get justice. But we are going to wrap this up with a story that is one that cuts to the core of identity and power and the very meaning of patriotism. It is about a man named David Maltinsky, a 16-year FBI veteran, nearly complete in his training to become a special agent, and now a plaintiff in a major constitutional lawsuit after being fired. The reason? A pride flag on his desk. I briefly mentioned this story before in one of my news recap videos, but now we have a lot more insight. So this case is not just about one man's career. It is, my new favorite word, a lightning rod for conversations that touch on free expression, the culture inside federal law enforcement, and what happens when political winds be shifting. It raises questions about how much space there is in patriotic institutions for LGBTQ plus people and what happens when personal expression collides with an administration that appears to be rolling back inclusion. So let's dig into it. Let's start by learning a little bit more about David Maltinsky. And as I said, he's not some recent hire. He's a 16-year FBI veteran. For many years, he served as an intelligence specialist working in the Los Angeles field office. According to his lawsuit, he's a decorated employee, someone who didn't just do his job. He led diversity programming inside the bureau, working on initiatives to make the FBI more inclusive. In 2021, the Los Angeles field office displayed a Progress Pride flag, the more inclusive pride design with a chevron of black, brown, pink, white, and light blue, alongside the traditional rainbow. That flag speaks not only to LGBTQ plus identity, but also to racial and gender diversity in queer communities. According to Maltinsky, when that flag came down, supervisors gave him a smaller version of it in recognition of his work, which I think is so sweet. See, I just got chills because that makes me emotional. That's kind, that's caring, that shows that you give a damn about the people that are working for and with you. And he hung that little mini flag in his cubicle with the approval of leadership for many, many years. Throughout this time, he remained open about his identity. He used the FBI's voluntary self-identification portal to mark himself as LGBTQ+, something that he never hid. He believed in his mission, in serving his country, and in the values of the Bureau, and he was living proof that queer people belong in these critical institutions. So that brings us to, what the hell happened? Why did he get fired? So in April of this year, Maltinsky began training at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia, one of the most rigorous and prestigious programs in the Bureau. He completed 16 out of the 19 weeks. He was so close to realizing his dream of becoming a special agent. Honestly, I want to be a special agent, but I don't know if I got 16 years of that in me. Like, watch The Silence of the Lambs once, and I'm like, please call me Clarice. I want to do that. So then, in October, everything changed for him. On October 1st, he was called into a meeting, handed a letter, which was a dismissal, signed by FBI Director Kash Patel. That little weasel, wiggly-eyed motherfucker. The letter said that he was being summarily dismissed for poor judgment and for having, I quote, an inappropriate display of political signage in his previous assignment in Los Angeles. And here's the thing. The lawsuit argues that the only sign in question was the pride flag, not a partisan banner, not a campaign poster, but a symbol of identity. And according to his attorneys, this was a pretext, a cover to hide discrimination. He did not violate any FBI policy. In fact, his leadership had approved the flag. Moreover, Maltinsky points out other officers had displayed far more politically charged or ideologically loaded flags with no consequence. Think blue line flags, even Punisher imagery, like things that tell you just whether someone's leaning right or left. And in short, Maltinsky says that he was being punished not because of his performance, but because of who he is. Let's talk a wee bit more about this lawsuit. It was filed in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. It names Kash Patel, the FBI, the Justice Department, and Pam Bondi, who is now Attorney General, as defendants. And what exactly is Maltinsky asking for? Well, several things. First, reinstatement. He wants his job back, to finish his training, and to become the special agent that he was on track to be. He wants a court declaration that his firing violated his First Amendment rights, specifically his right to expressive conduct. He argues that displaying the pride flag is expressive, personal, and protected, especially because it's not partisan in the way that Patel described. Being gay is not partisan, because if it was, there would be no fucking Republican gays that voted for Trump and still want to lick his hole. Like, no. I'm getting worked up. I need to remain calm to get the point across. Breathe. He also says that it is a Fifth Amendment violation, equal protection under the law. His suit says he was targeted as a proud gay man and discriminated against for his identity. His attorney, Christopher M. Matai, has framed it this way. He says that it isn't just about Maltinsky's career, it's about whether the government, especially agencies like the FBI, can punish employees simply for saying who they are, for expressing a core part of their identity. And again, the flag is about inclusivity. Having that flag on your desk might signal to someone that you're open, that you're someone that they can come to, that you have had different struggles, and maybe there's somebody that feels like it's a safe space. I just don't understand it. And let's look at the broader context here to fully understand his fight. We have to look at the bigger political and cultural moments inside the FBI. Maltinsky himself has used a phrase that carries heavy historical weight, and I've talked about it before. He has said that this is a new lavender scare. The original lavender scare happened in the 1950s, when the US government systematically purged employees, especially in national security agencies, simply for being suspected of being gay or lesbian. It was part of McCarthy-era paranoia, but its effects were very devastating. Careers ended, people went back into the closet, and the message was loud and clear. Being queer made you a risk. According to Maltinsky, his firing sent a shockwave across the bureau. Within hours, LGBTQ plus colleagues removed pride flags from their desk. Allies did the same. People were suddenly worried about what might happen if they expressed who they were. And wouldn't you think that's exactly what fucking Patel probably wanted? That ripple effect, he says, is exactly what terrified him. That his termination would chill expression. It would silence queer voices and make the FBI less inclusive and less safe for LGBTQ plus people. He told The Advocate that he wants the lawsuit to put an end to that fear. He also shared something deeply personal. When he was fired, he lost not just his job, he lost his home. He had given up his lease in LA to relocate for training, and now, in the midst of this fight, he's staying with friends. But on the bright side, he says that he remains committed to his oath, to defending the Constitution, to serving his country, and now to fighting for justice, not just for himself, but for others who feel vulnerable. Maltinsky's firing and now his lawsuit has not gone unnoticed, but again, I don't think it's been noticed enough. Democratic lawmakers have condemned the move. The Congressional Equality Caucus called it despicable that he was fired. They point out that federal law explicitly protects the rights of employees to display secular or religious items at their desks, so long as they are done neutrally. According to guidance from the Office of Personnel Management, if you can have a crucifix or a Bible on your desk, you can't be banned for having a pride flag. It's illegal to enforce those rules unevenly. So unless we're going to strip the Bibles and the cross necklaces and the crucifixes from everyone's desk too, then y'all need to shove it. Critics see this as a part of a broader purge. Under Patel's leadership, they argue the FBI is no longer the neutral, which it's supposed to be very neutral. It's no longer professional like it once was, but is instead shaped by ideological loyalty to Voldemort. No, to Trump. The timing is also notable. Patel's decision came on the first day of a government shutdown, which some observers suggest was a way to minimize public attention. Sneaky, sneaky, Patel, but we see you, even though you might not be able to see us because your eyes look in different directions. Now, I touched a little bit on what Maltinsky really wants here, but beyond his personal goal of reinstatement, This is about setting a precedent, just like I think for Patel, it was about setting a precedent. You can't be gay here, but he's flipping the script on him. He's not just suing for himself, he is suing for all federal employees, especially queer federal employees, obviously, who may feel that their identities must be hidden to survive. He's demanding recognition that having a pride flag is not political signage, but a declaration of who he is. It's not a campaign poster, but it's a symbol of dignity, belonging, and diversity. He also hopes that his case will help rebuild trust inside the FBI to create a safer space for LGBTQ plus people and to stop what he describes as a culture of fear. He wants an affirmation from the courts that expressions of identity, even in highly politicized institutions, are protected under the Constitution. And on a deeper level, Maltinsky's legal fight is his way of saying, you can fire me, but you can't erase me. And although you may dream like me of being a part of the FBI, why should someone who isn't part of the FBI care about this? Because it is about fundamental questions of who we allow to serve our nation, not just as patriotic citizens, but as whole entire people. It's about whether our national security institutions reflect the diversity of our country or whether they force people to check parts of themselves at the door. It also sends a message to every marginalized public servant. There is a cost to visibility, but there can also be power in speaking up if you choose to fight. And for the broader public, this case is a test. Will the courts affirm that even in apolitical institutions, identity matters? Will the law protect people against discriminatory firings rooted in bias? Will the FBI remain an institution where patriotism and personal identity can coexist? Or will it revert to punishing difference? And as you can imagine, I'll be standing by for an update, and I'm going to keep my, finger on the pulse, baby. And that pretty much wraps up this very fun episode of Hot Air, our little roundup. We covered a lot today again, from the Trump administration's erasure of LGBTQ plus Americans in official reports to the legal tug of war over the Epstein files and the courageous fight of David Maltinsky to be recognized and respected for who he is, and that little update about Texas gerrymandering. These stories show us just how high the stakes can be when identity, power, and justice collide head fucking on, and why it's so important to stay informed, to speak out and speak up and hold institutions accountable. Don't forget to follow me on social media on Instagram and TikTok at _hotairpod. Grab some merch if you want to support the show and submit your listener stories and topic suggestions on my website, hotairwithjoshuarobert.com. Your engagement helps the show grow, and your voices keep the conversations alive and, quite frankly, inspire me and help me figure out what the hell I'm going to jibber jab about next week. So thanks for tuning in. Keep questioning, keep pushing for the truth, and I will see you next Tuesday.